At my daughter's funeral, her greedy husband leaned in close and hissed, "I'll be spending her 75 million on yachts and mansions, and you'll be left with nothing, old man." I just smiled. Then she quietly giggled from inside the coffin. His face turned white as a ghost when he realized the dead sometimes come back to take everything. Before listening to this story, we have an important announcement for you. Unfortunately, we are discontinuing this channel, and it will be deleted soon. If you want to continue listening to new stories, subscribe to our new channel, Cold Revenge. The link to it will be in the collaboration with this video, in the description of this video, and in the comments. Thank you for your attention. My name is Harold Bishop. I'm 68 years old, and I've called Savannah, Georgia home for the past 4 decades. Spent 35 years as a cardiac surgeon at Savannah Memorial Hospital, cutting open chests, repairing broken hearts, and sewing people back together. Retired 5 years ago. These days I carve miniature ships in my garage workshop, 3 or 4 hours every morning. Steady hands don't just disappear because you stop operating. I live in the family mansion on Drayton Street, 4 stories of Georgian Revival architecture, built in 1892, worth about $4 million. But the house is just wood and brick. What made it a home was my daughter Sophia. She's 34 now, an art curator at one of the galleries downtown. Got her mother's eyes, warm, trusting, always seeing the best in people. That last quality, it nearly got her killed. Daniel Perry entered our lives 7 years ago. I still remember the evening Sophia brought him to dinner. He walked in wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. Smile so wide you could count every tooth. An investment consultant, he said. Managed portfolios for high net worth clients. Charming, articulate, knew exactly what to say and when to say it. I've met men like Daniel before. In the operating room we call them bleeders. They look fine on the surface, but underneath something's very wrong. Still, Sophia loved him. And what does a father know about his daughter's heart? They married a year later. Grand ceremony. 300 guests. I paid for everything. $240,000 to be exact. Daniel's wealthy clients somehow couldn't make it. The first 2 years seemed fine. Daniel was attentive, present. He'd bring Sophia flowers, remember anniversaries, play the devoted husband. But somewhere around year 3, the mask started slipping. He began disappearing for business trips that lasted longer and longer. His phone became surgically attached to his hand. Screen always tilted away from Sophia. He'd snap at her over small things. A question asked too loudly, dinner served too late. His eyes grew colder, calculating as if he was always measuring something none of us could see. 2 years ago, I noticed how he'd look at me, like I was furniture, outdated furniture that hadn't been thrown out yet. He'd speak past me at family dinners, address Sophia as if I wasn't in the room. Your father became his preferred way of referencing me. Never Harold, never Dad, certainly never anything warm. The contempt was subtle at first, a dismissive wave when I offered advice, rolling eyes when I mentioned my career. Different generation, he'd mutter, as if that explained everything, as if being older meant being obsolete. I watched, I observed. That's what surgeons do. We read bodies, interpret symptoms, diagnose what others miss. And Daniel's symptoms were getting worse. That particular Monday in early March was unseasonably warm, even for Savannah. I was in my workshop working on a 3-masted schooner, hull already shaped, just starting on the rigging. The garage door was cracked open for ventilation, and through it I could hear Daniel's voice floating up from the garden below. He was on his phone, pacing between the magnolias, speaking quietly, but not quietly enough. 2 more months, that's all. 2 more months, and this witch signs everything over. I set down my carving knife, moved closer to the door. My heart, the organ I'd spent 35 years repairing in others, began pounding against my ribs. Then we arrange a little accident, nothing traceable. These things happen, Vanessa. People slip. People fall. People just stop breathing. The blood drained from my face. 75 million, baby. 75 million. We've earned this. I've spent 6 years playing the loving husband to that naive little princess. 6 years pretending her ancient father wasn't looking at me like I was something he scraped off his shoe. It ends soon, he laughed, low, confident, certain. The old man? What's he going to do? He's practically senile. Spends all day playing with toy boats. By the time he figures out what happened, I'll be on a yacht in the Caribbean with you. I gripped the doorframe so hard the wood groaned. Daniel ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. He stretched, rolled his shoulders, then walked back toward the house with the easy stride of a man who believed he had already won. I stood frozen in my workshop, surrounded by half-finished ships and the smell of sawdust. My hands trembled, and my hands never tremble. 75 million. That was Sophia's inheritance. Money I'd earned over 3 decades of saving lives, built through careful investment, intended to secure my daughter's future, and this parasite planned to murder her for it. For one terrible moment, I imagined walking into the garden, finding Daniel, and... No, I am not that man. I've spent my life healing, not harming, but I am also not a fool. I watched Daniel through the workshop window as he entered the house, probably heading to kiss my daughter on the cheek and ask about her day. The perfect husband, the loving partner, the man planning her death. He glanced back toward the garden once, as if sensing something. His eyes swept across the lawn, past the magnolias, and briefly, so briefly, toward my workshop. I didn't move, didn't breathe. He shrugged and went inside. I waited until the door closed. Then I picked up my carving knife and examined the blade. Still sharp, still precise, still capable of the most delicate work. Daniel Perry thought he was dealing with a senile old man who played with toy boats. He thought I was harmless, irrelevant, already defeated. But here's what 35 years of cardiac surgery teaches you. Cutting is easy. Anyone can make an incision. The real skill is knowing exactly where to cut and when. Daniel thought he was the predator in this house. He was wrong. The next 2 days I watched him, studied him the way I used to study x-rays before a complex procedure. Every gesture catalogued, every phone call noted, every late-night work emergency logged in my memory. Sophia noticed nothing. She was too trusting, too kind, too willing to believe the best about the man she'd married. That beautiful quality, the same one that made her such a wonderful daughter, was now putting her life in danger. I kept seeing flashbacks, moments from the past that felt like artifacts from another lifetime. I remembered Sophia at 7 years old, holding up a crayon drawing she'd made at school, a big red heart with Daddy, written inside in wobbly letters. "I made this for you," she'd said, her gap-toothed smile so wide it practically split her face. "Because you fix hearts. So now you have one that never breaks." I still had that drawing, kept it in my desk drawer, tucked between old insurance papers and fading photographs. The crayon had faded over the years, but the words remained clear. How do you tell that little girl, now a grown woman of 34, that the husband she adores is planning to murder her? I remembered Sophia at 16, crying on the porch swing because a boy had broken her heart for the first time. She'd sat there with her knees pulled to her chest and asked me a question I'd never forgotten. "Daddy, how do you know when someone really loves you?" I'd thought about it carefully before answering. When they choose you, not just once, every day. Real love is a decision you make over and over again. She'd nodded, wiped her tears, and hugged me tight. I hope I find someone like that someday. 18 years later, she thought she'd found that person. Except Daniel Perry didn't choose her. He chose her money. And when that money was finally secured, he'd choose to end her life. On the 3rd day after overhearing that phone call, I made my decision. I couldn't handle this alone. I needed information, evidence, proof. I found Clarence Webb through the phone book. Private investigator, former police officer, office on Whitaker Street. His advertisement promised discretion. His office was small and cluttered, smelling like stale coffee and old paper. Clarence himself was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, with skeptical eyes that had clearly seen too much. $8,000 up front, he said after I'd explained what I needed. More depending on what I find. I wrote the check without hesitation. I need everything on Daniel Perry. Financial records, phone activity, who he meets, where he goes, what he does when he thinks nobody's watching. Clarence studied me for a moment. This about money? Cheating spouse? This is about my daughter's life. Something in my voice made him nod slowly. He didn't ask any more questions. A week later, Clarence called me back to his office. The file on his desk was thick, 2 inches of documents, photographs, and printed records. Your son-in-law's got problems, Clarence said. Big ones. Daniel owed $340,000. Gambling debts, online poker, sports betting, high-stakes games at underground clubs in Atlanta, the kind of debts that don't disappear. Clarence slid a photograph across the desk. Daniel and a young woman walking into the mansion on Forsyth Park, 3 days after he'd told Sophia he was at a conference in Charlotte. Her name's Vanessa Crawford, 29 years old, works as his assistant, though I'd say with him covers more than just professional duties. Daniel's hand rested on her lower back, guiding her toward the entrance. She was looking up at him with unmistakable intimacy, the kind of look that doesn't belong between colleagues. 11 meetings in the past month alone, Clarence continued. Hotels, restaurants, a rented apartment downtown. I need proof of what he's planning, I said. He's going to kill my daughter. A long silence. Clarence leaned back in his chair. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Bishop. I heard him say it myself, on the phone, in my own garden. Another pause. Then Clarence nodded. I'll dig deeper. Now came the hardest part. I found Sophia in the garden that evening, watering the rose bushes. The sunset painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Sophia, we need to talk. She set down the watering can immediately. Dad, what's wrong? It's about Daniel. And I told her everything. The phone call, the investigation, the gambling debts, the affair. At first she didn't believe me. She defended him, made excuses, insisted there must be some misunderstanding. The tears came, hot and angry. Then I showed her the photographs. Something shattered behind her eyes. I watched it happen. The exact moment when love collided with truth, and truth won. She sank onto the garden bench. This can't be real, she whispered. I'm sorry, sweetheart. The next day, while Daniel was at another meeting, Sophia went through his phone. She found the messages, the planning, casual discussions of her death. Just a little more patience, darling. Soon we'll be free. That evening I found Sophia in my study, eyes red but dry. The phone lay on the desk between us. What are we going to do? She asked. Her voice was steady now, stronger than I'd expected. I sat down and folded my hands. The surgeon in me took over, calm, methodical. We are going to give him exactly what he wants. Sophia frowned. What do you mean? Daniel wants you dead. So we're going to arrange a funeral. Your funeral. We'll let him believe he's won. And then, a thin smile crossed my face, the kind I used to wear before a challenging operation. And then we watch him destroy himself. Sophia stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. When do we start? The following morning, I sat in my workshop with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. The half-finished schooner waited on my workbench, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. My mind was too busy designing a different kind of vessel, one that would sink Daniel Perry's entire world. A simple divorce wouldn't work. I'd learned that from Clarence's research. Daniel had been clever. The prenuptial agreement Sophia had signed, the one that protected her assets, had mysteriously vanished from our family lawyer's files. Misplaced, Daniel had suggested when Sophia asked about it a year ago. These things happen. Convenient how these things always seem to happen in Daniel's favor. Without that prenup, a divorce meant splitting everything. $75 million divided down the middle. Daniel would walk away with $37.5 million for his trouble. 6 years of playing the loving husband, and his payday would be larger than most lottery winners ever see. That wasn't justice. That was rewarding a predator for stalking his prey. I needed something better, something that would leave Daniel with nothing. I spent the next 3 days observing him with fresh eyes, not as a concerned father-in-law, but as a surgeon examining a patient with a terminal diagnosis. Every symptom catalogued, every weakness noted. Daniel's greatest weakness was his arrogance. He genuinely believed he was the smartest person in every room. I watched him at dinner, the way he'd steer conversations back to himself, the way his eyes would glaze over when anyone else spoke. He didn't listen. He waited for his turn to talk. He also underestimated everyone around him. To Daniel, Sophia was a naive heiress, too blinded by love to see his true nature. I was a senile old man who spent his days playing with wooden boats. We weren't threats. We were obstacles he'd already mentally dismissed. That arrogance would be his downfall. I observed his interactions with Sophia, the casual touches that didn't quite reach his eyes, the way he'd check his phone mid-conversation, always angling the screen away, the barely concealed irritation when she asked where he'd been. "Just work, sweetheart," he'd say, that practiced smile sliding into place. "You know how demanding clients can be." Clients? Right. Vanessa Crawford must be very demanding indeed. Sophia played her part perfectly. After our conversation in the garden, something had shifted in her. The naive trust was gone, replaced by something harder. She smiled at Daniel's lies now, but the smile never reached her eyes. She was watching him too, cataloging his deceptions, building her own case against the man she'd married. I was proud of her. My daughter had inherited more than her mother's eyes. She'd inherited steel. By the end of the week, I knew what we needed. A lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who specialized in the kind of complex legal warfare that could destroy a man without ever touching him. I found Marcus Reed through a recommendation from Clarence Webb. His office was on Bay Street, 12th floor, with a view of the Savannah River. The receptionist led me into a conference room where Marcus was already waiting. A lean man in his early 50s with silver at his temples and the kind of precise, measured movements that reminded me of surgeons. "Mr. Bishop," he shook my hand firmly, "Clarence speaks highly of you. I need your help, Mr. Reed. My situation is complicated. They usually are. Please sit." I told him everything. The overheard phone call, Daniel's gambling debts, Vanessa Crawford, the missing prenuptial agreement, the plan to murder my daughter for her inheritance. Marcus listened without interrupting, making occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back. "You're right. A divorce is problematic. Without the prenup, Mr. Perry would be entitled to a significant portion of your daughter's assets. Given the length of the marriage and the commingling of funds, he could argue for substantially more than half." "Then what do you suggest?" Marcus's eyes took on a calculating gleam. "Have you ever heard of the Slayer rule, Mr. Bishop?" I hadn't. He explained it to me, a legal principle embedded in Georgia law that prevented anyone from inheriting from a person they had killed or conspired to kill. The moment Daniel could be proven to have planned Sophia's death, he would lose all claim to her estate. "The problem," Marcus continued, "is proving intent. A phone conversation you overheard wouldn't be enough. We need documentation, recordings, something that demonstrates a clear pattern of conspiracy. And if we could provide that evidence, then Mr. Perry wouldn't just lose the money, Mr. Bishop. He'd lose his freedom." I left Marcus's office 2 hours later with the skeleton of a plan taking shape in my mind. It was risky. It required precise timing, careful documentation, and an actress capable of the performance of her life. Fortunately, I knew exactly who could play that role. That evening, Sophia and I met in my study, the door locked, the curtains drawn. I explained what Marcus had told me about the Slayer rule, about the evidence we'd need, about the plan that was forming in my mind. "You want me to pretend to be dying," Sophia said slowly, "and then pretend to be dead. I want to give Daniel exactly what he wants. Let him believe he's won. And then, when he's standing over your coffin celebrating his victory, we take everything from him." I nodded. "It's risky. If anything goes wrong." "Dad." Sophia reached across the desk and took my hand. Her grip was strong, steady. "He was going to kill me. Actually kill me. For money. After everything I gave him. My love, my trust. 6 years of my life. He was going to arrange an accident and sail away with his mistress." Her eyes hardened. "Let's destroy him." The preparations took nearly a month. Every detail had to be perfect. One mistake, one overlooked element, and the entire plan would collapse. First, we needed to establish Sophia's illness. I reached out to a former colleague from the hospital, Dr. Raymond Foster, a cardiologist I'd worked with for 15 years. I trusted him with my daughter's life. More importantly, I trusted him with my daughter's death. Raymond was skeptical at first. You want me to diagnose her with a terminal heart condition she doesn't have. I want you to create medical records that will withstand scrutiny. The diagnosis doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be believable. Harold, what you're asking me to do could save my daughter's life. I told him everything. The phone call, Daniel's plan, the conspiracy with Vanessa Crawford. Raymond's face grew progressively darker as I spoke. That piece of... He caught himself. All right, I will do it. But I want to be clear. The moment this is over, those records disappear. Understood. Over the following weeks, Sophia began her performance. She started complaining of fatigue, shortness of breath, chest pains. She made appointments with Raymond, who ran tests and delivered increasingly grim prognoses. By the second week, the diagnosis was official, a rare and aggressive form of cardiomyopathy. The irony wasn't lost on me. A heart surgeon's daughter, dying of a broken heart. Daniel played his part beautifully, though he didn't know he was in a play. He became the devoted husband again, bringing Sophia flowers, holding her hand, wiping his dry eyes when the doctors delivered bad news. He was so convincing that I almost believed it myself. Almost. Clarence, meanwhile, continued his surveillance. Every meeting with Vanessa was documented. Every whispered phone call recorded. The evidence file grew thicker by the day. The most damning piece came 2 weeks into Sophia's illness. Clarence had managed to capture video footage from the garden, my garden, where Daniel met with Vanessa late one evening. They thought they were alone. "A month," Daniel said on the recording. "Maybe less. The doctors say her heart could give out any day now." "And then?" Vanessa's voice, eager and hungry. "Then we wait a respectable period. 6 months, maybe a year. And then you and I take that 75 million and disappear." "What about the old man?" Daniel laughed. "What about him? He'll be too busy grieving to notice anything. And even if he did, what's he going to do? He's practically a corpse himself." I watched that video 17 times. Each viewing fueled my resolve. Meanwhile, I made other arrangements. The funeral home was selected. Bonaventure Memorial, a historic establishment known for its discretion. The director, a professional named Walter Simmons, was brought into our confidence. For a considerable fee, he agreed to participate in our Theater of the Dead. The casket was special ordered, modified with a discreet air supply and a hidden microphone that would capture every word spoken over my daughter's body. The technology was simple but elegant, just like the plan itself. Sophia signed a new will, secretly notarized in Marcus Reed's office. Under its terms, her entire estate would pass to a charitable foundation and to me. Daniel Perry would receive nothing, not a cent, not a memory. The document was locked in Marcus's safe, waiting for its moment. As the third week ended, Sophia's condition worsened. She took to her bed, pale and drawn, the picture of a woman slipping away. Daniel hovered nearby, his concern almost convincing, but I saw the truth beneath the mask. The way he'd check his phone when he thought no one was looking, the slight smile that crossed his face when the doctors spoke of limited time, the anticipation of a man watching his ship come in. He thought he was so clever, so careful, so perfectly positioned to collect his prize. He had no idea that the ship was headed straight for the rocks. On the final night, the night Sophia would die, I stood in her bedroom doorway and watched her sleeping face. She wasn't really sleeping, of course, just practicing, preparing for the longest, most motionless sleep of her life. Daniel came up behind me, placed a hand on my shoulder. I managed not to flinch. "How is she?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "The doctors don't think she'll make it through the week." He squeezed my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Harold. I know this must be hard for you." Hard. Yes. Watching a serpent slither around my home, plotting my daughter's murder, had been rather hard indeed. "She's strong," I said, like her mother was. "She is." Daniel's hand dropped away. "Well, I should let you rest. Big day tomorrow. Big day." The words hung in the air after he left. He had no idea how big. At exactly 3:47 the next morning, Sophia Bishop Perry was pronounced dead by Dr. Raymond Foster. The death certificate was signed. The funeral home was called. Daniel stood beside me as they wheeled her away. His face was arranged in grief, the devoted husband watching his wife slip away. But his eyes told a different story. Relief. Pure, undisguised, unmistakable relief. I saw it in the way his shoulders relaxed, in the slight loosening of his jaw, in the almost imperceptible nod he gave himself, as if checking off an item on a to-do list. The predator thought his hunt was finally over. $75 million waiting to be claimed. He had no idea it had just begun. As the funeral home attendants carried Sophia away, Daniel turned to me with practiced sympathy. "Is there anything I can do, Harold?" I looked at this creature who had plotted to murder my daughter. "Just be there for the funeral. That's all I ask." Daniel nodded solemnly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." No, I thought, you certainly wouldn't. 3 days later, we buried my daughter. Or rather, we staged the most elaborate piece of theater Savannah had seen in decades. The funeral was held at Bonaventure Memorial, a historic establishment known for its elegant services and absolute discretion. 87 guests attended. Family friends, colleagues from Sophia's gallery, neighbors who'd known her since childhood. They came to pay their respects, tissues clutched in trembling hands, faces drawn with genuine grief. They had no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. I stood at the entrance greeting mourners as they arrived. The role of grieving father came naturally. After all, I had spent weeks watching my daughter pretend to die. That experience leaves marks even when you know it's theater. Daniel arrived fashionably late, of course. He stepped out of his Mercedes, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. I'd seen the receipt, $4,200 charged to my credit card. Even in death, he was spending my money. Vanessa Crawford came separately, maintaining the fiction of professional distance. She positioned herself near the back of the chapel, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, the supportive assistant, mourning alongside the grieving widower. They thought they were so clever, so careful, so perfectly positioned to inherit everything. They had no idea what was waiting inside that casket. The service began at 2 o'clock. A string quartet played something appropriately somber. Friends spoke of Sophia's kindness, her artistic vision, the light she brought to every room. I delivered a eulogy that was entirely sincere, praising my daughter's courage, her strength, her ability to face adversity with grace. Daniel sat in the front row, nodding along, the picture of devoted widowhood. Occasionally he'd wipe his eyes, though I noticed he never actually produced any tears. The handkerchief remained conspicuously dry. After the formal service, the guests gathered around the open casket for a final viewing. Sophia lay there in a pale blue dress, her favorite color, looking for all the world like a woman peacefully sleeping. The makeup artist had done remarkable work. She looked beautiful, serene, utterly convincingly dead. The special casket had been modified with a small air supply and sound-dampening material. From outside, it appeared perfectly normal. Inside, Sophia could breathe, listen, and wait for her cue. I positioned myself near the head of the casket, accepting condolences, shaking hands, playing my part. Daniel worked the room like a politician at a fundraiser, graciously accepting sympathy, already calculating his next moves. Then he made his way toward me, the moment I'd been waiting for. Daniel approached the casket, placed his hand over his heart, and gazed down at Sophia's face with an expression of profound loss. It was a masterful performance. Anyone watching would have seen a husband saying goodbye to the love of his life. Anyone except me. He leaned close to my ear, close enough that no one else could hear. "I'll be spending her $75 million on yachts and mansions," he whispered, "and you'll be left with nothing, old man. She was too good for this world, but the money stays with me." I felt Sophia stiffen slightly inside the casket. She'd heard every word. Daniel pulled back, arranged his face in a mask of sorrow, and patted my shoulder. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Harold." I looked at him. This parasite, this predator, this man who had spent 6 years planning to murder my daughter. And I smiled, just smiled, didn't say a word. Daniel's brow furrowed slightly. He'd expected grief, perhaps anger, perhaps the broken weeping of a devastated father, certainly not a smile. But he dismissed it quickly, attributing my expression to shock or senility, or whatever explanation suited his arrogant worldview. After all, I was just the senile old man who played with toy boats. He walked away toward Vanessa, who was waiting near the chapel entrance. They exchanged a glance, brief, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't watching for it, but loaded with shared anticipation. 6 years of planning, finally paying off. Or so they believed. And then from inside the casket came a sound, a soft, unmistakable giggle. Daniel froze mid-step. His shoulders went rigid. The expensive fabric of his suit suddenly stretched tight across his back. Slowly, so painfully slowly, he turned back toward the casket. The lid began to rise. Sophia sat up, still wearing that pale blue dress, her eyes fixed directly on Daniel's face. She smiled. Not the warm smile I remembered from her childhood, not the trusting smile she'd given him on their wedding day. This was something colder, sharper, the smile of a woman who had heard every word of her own death sentence. "Yachts and mansions, you said?" Her voice carried across the suddenly silent chapel. "I'd love to hear more about your plans, darling husband." For one perfect crystalline moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The string quartet had stopped playing. The mourners stood frozen like statues. Even the dust motes seemed to hang suspended in the afternoon light. Then Daniel's face drained of all color. The confident tan, the carefully maintained complexion, the healthy glow of a man who spent weekends on golf courses. All of it vanished in an instant, leaving behind something the color of old bone. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. His eyes, which had always held that calculating gleam, went wide with something I'd never seen in them before. Pure, absolute terror. I stepped forward, placed my hand on my daughter's shoulder, warm, alive, victorious, and finally spoke. "You know, Daniel, surgeons don't just stop hearts. We can restart them too." What happened next was chaos of the most satisfying variety. Daniel's knees buckled. He actually staggered backward, nearly tripping over a funeral wreath, his arms windmilling as he tried to maintain balance. The color still hadn't returned to his face. If anything, he'd gone even paler, a shade I'd only seen before in patients with severe blood loss. "No," he managed to croak. "No, this isn't... You were dead. You were dead." Sophia swung her legs over the side of the casket and stood, smoothing her dress with the casual grace of someone who hadn't just risen from a coffin. "Was I? How strange. I feel perfectly fine." Around us the chapel erupted. An elderly woman in the third row fainted dead away. Her husband caught her, nearly going down himself. Someone screamed. Someone else was laughing hysterically. Several guests had pulled out their phones and were filming everything. Daniel's fight-or-flight instinct finally kicked in, and he chose flight. He bolted for the exit, shoving past mourners, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished floor. He'd almost reached the door when two large men stepped into his path. Private security, hired specifically for this moment. Former colleagues of Clarence Webb, built like defensive linemen. "Going somewhere, Mr. Perry?" the larger one asked pleasantly. Daniel tried to push past them. It was like trying to push past a brick wall. They simply stood there, arms crossed, blocking his escape. "You can't do this." Daniel's voice had gone shrill. This is assault. False imprisonment. I'll sue every single one of you." "I don't think you will," I said, walking toward him. Sophia followed, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted before us like a living sea. Meanwhile, Vanessa Crawford had made her own critical error. "This is some kind of trick," she screamed from across the room. "She was dead. I saw the death certificate. This is fraud." Every head in the room turned toward her. Vanessa's mouth snapped shut as she realized what she'd just done. An assistant, a mere professional colleague, wouldn't have seen any death certificate, wouldn't have been so invested in confirming Sophia's demise, wouldn't have revealed such intimate knowledge of the situation. "And how exactly would you know about the death certificate, Miss Crawford?" Sophia asked, her voice cold as ice. "I don't believe we've met." Vanessa's face went through a rapid series of expressions. Surprise, fear, desperate calculation, before settling on something approximating defiance. Daniel told me. As his assistant, I handle all his paperwork." "Interesting," I nodded to Clarence, who had been waiting near the side door. "Clarence, do you happen to have that photograph? The one from the mansion on Forsyth Park?" Clarence produced a glossy 8x10 and held it up for the room to see. Daniel and Vanessa, walking arm in arm into a luxury hotel, their body language leaving absolutely nothing to the imagination. "This kind of paperwork?" I asked mildly. What little color remained in Vanessa's face disappeared entirely. The police arrived 12 minutes later. I'd timed it. Detective Rachel Morgan, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, took charge of the scene with practiced efficiency. She listened to my explanation with growing astonishment, reviewed the preliminary evidence Clarence provided, and made the calls that would change everything. "Mr. Perry, Miss Crawford," she announced, "you're both coming with us for questioning." "I haven't done anything wrong," Daniel's voice cracked. "This is entrapment. This old man staged his daughter's death to humiliate me." "Perhaps," Detective Morgan said evenly, "but we also have evidence suggesting you were planning to stage Mrs. Perry's actual death for considerably more permanent purposes." The remaining color drained from Daniel's face. Again, I was beginning to think he'd need a blood transfusion by the time this was over. They were escorted out in separate vehicles. Daniel tried to maintain some dignity, straightening his $4,000 suit, lifting his chin, attempting to project the image of an innocent man being wrongfully detained. But his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't even button his jacket. His fingers fumbled uselessly at the buttons, trembling like leaves in a hurricane. Vanessa went quietly, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She kept glancing at Daniel, searching for reassurance, for some sign of their shared plan. But he refused to meet her eyes, already distancing himself, already calculating how to save his own skin, already preparing to throw her under the bus if necessary. That's the thing about people like Daniel and Vanessa. Their alliance was built on greed, not loyalty, and greed is a foundation that crumbles the moment pressure is applied. At the police station, Daniel demanded a lawyer. "Your lawyer is already here," the desk sergeant informed him with barely concealed amusement. The interrogation room door opened, and Marcus Reed walked in. Daniel's face, impossibly, went even whiter. I watched through the observation window as every remaining drop of blood seemed to drain from his features. You're supposed to be my lawyer. You worked on our prenup. Marcus settled into the chair across from him with the calm precision of a chess grandmaster about to announce checkmate. He adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his tie, took his time. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Mr. Perry. I represent the Bishop family. I always have." He placed a thick folder on the table between them. "And I have some documents you might want to see." Daniel didn't stay in custody long. By the next morning, he'd managed to post bail, $50,000, which I later learned came from Vanessa's savings account. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman he'd been planning to betray was now funding his freedom. But freedom is a relative term, and Daniel was about to discover just how relative. Within 48 hours, he'd hired a new attorney. Howard Price was a sleek, silver-tongued litigator who charged $500 an hour and had a reputation for turning hopeless cases into victories. I'd heard of him before, the kind of lawyer who could convince a jury that black was white if the price was right. His strategy became clear immediately. Attack. "My client is the victim here," Price announced at a hastily arranged press conference. Mr. Harold Bishop, consumed by irrational hatred for his son-in-law, orchestrated an elaborate and cruel hoax to publicly humiliate Daniel Perry. The psychological trauma inflicted upon my client is immeasurable. He went on to announce that Daniel was filing a civil suit against both Sophia and me for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages sought, $2 million. The media predictably went into a frenzy. "Woman rises from coffin at own funeral," screamed the headlines. The story spread across local news, then national news, then the internet. Cable news devoted entire segments to analyzing what they called the Savannah Resurrection. By the end of the week, there were memes circulating everywhere. Late-night talk show hosts made jokes about marriage and in-laws. Amateur investigators on social media were piecing together theories, some wildly inaccurate, others uncomfortably close to the truth. And Daniel played his part perfectly. He gave interviews to anyone who would listen, morning shows, evening news, podcasts, even a tabloid reporter who cornered him outside his apartment. In each one, he portrayed himself as the devoted husband, blindsided by a vengeful father-in-law who had never accepted him. He spoke of his dear departed wife, then corrected himself with a rueful, practiced smile. his apparently not so departed wife. He was charming, self-deprecating, sympathetic. The cameras loved him. "The old man never liked me," Daniel said in one particularly memorable interview, his voice catching with practiced emotion. "From the moment I started dating Sophia, he was suspicious. He thought I was after his money. But I loved his daughter. I still love her. And this cruel hoax, is how they repay 6 years of devotion." Some people believed him, more than I'd expected, honestly. The comment sections beneath every article filled with supporters calling us cruel and vindictive. Social media accounts accused us of psychological torture. A petition appeared on one of those online platforms demanding that Sophia be charged with fraud. It gathered 12,000 signatures in 3 days. Public opinion is a fickle beast, and Daniel knew exactly how to manipulate it. Sophia was shaken. She'd been prepared for battle, but not for the court of public opinion. "Dad, what if he wins?" she asked me one evening, her voice tight with worry. "What if the jury believes him?" We were sitting in my study, the place where this whole plan had been conceived. The same desk, the same chairs, the same determination. I smiled. Daniel is very good at controlling narratives. But there's one thing he doesn't know about. "What's that?" "The video." Sophia frowned. "You mean the recordings Clarence made? He's already claiming those were illegally obtained." "Not those recordings." I leaned back in my chair. "The one from the security camera in our garden. The one I installed after that conversation I overheard in early March." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You recorded him." "I recorded everything. Every conversation he had in that garden. Every whispered phone call to Vanessa. Every plan he thought was private. All of it stored on a secure drive, waiting for exactly the right moment. I'd kept that footage hidden, even from Marcus initially. Daniel thought he was fighting a battle of public perception. He thought his charm and his expensive lawyer and his rehearsed interviews would carry the day. He didn't realize that his own words, captured in high definition, time-stamped and completely unalterable, were about to become his prison bars. The summons arrived 3 days later, delivered by a process server who seemed almost apologetic. We were ordered to appear at the Chatham County Courthouse for a preliminary hearing on Daniel's civil suit. I dressed carefully that morning, my best suit, freshly pressed, my watch, a retirement gift from the hospital board, my favorite cufflinks, the ones shaped like tiny scalpels, a surgeon going into the most important operation of his life. "Ready?" Sophia asked as we left the house. I looked at her, my daughter who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger, who had trusted me enough to lie in a coffin and wait for her moment. "I've been ready for months," I said. "Let's finish this." The Chatham County Courthouse was a grand old building, all marble columns and soaring ceilings. It smelled of old paper and older ambitions. Hundreds of cases had been decided within these walls, lives changed by the stroke of a judge's pen. Today would add one more to that number. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be straightforward. Daniel's attorney presenting the civil suit, our side responding, a judge deciding whether the case had merit. Simple procedure. Howard Price stood before Judge Catherine Sullivan with the confidence of a man who'd already won. "Your Honor, we are prepared to demonstrate a clear pattern of harassment and intentional emotional harm perpetrated by Harold and Sophia Bishop against my client." Marcus Reed rose from our table. "Your Honor, before opposing counsel proceeds, the defense would like to introduce new evidence relevant to this proceeding." Price's eyebrow twitched, just slightly. "We've received no discovery disclosure of new evidence." This evidence was gathered subsequent to the initial filing, and pertains directly to the plaintiffs standing in this case. Judge Sullivan leaned forward. "What is the nature of this evidence, Mr. Reed?" "Video recordings, Your Honor. Recordings that demonstrate not only the plaintiff's infidelity, but his active conspiracy to murder Mrs. Sophia Bishop Perry for her inheritance." The courtroom erupted. Price's face went red. Daniel, sitting at the plaintiff's table, suddenly looked less like a victim and more like a trapped animal. "Objection!" Price shouted. "This is clearly an attempt to derail these proceedings with inflammatory accusations." "The recordings speak for themselves, Your Honor," Marcus replied calmly. "We request permission to play them for the court." Judge Sullivan considered for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll allow it. Mr. Reed, proceed. Marcus opened his laptop, connected it to the courtroom's display system, and pressed play. Daniel's face filled the screen. The garden of my home, our home, visible in the background. The timestamp showed a date in late February, weeks before Sophia's illness began. A month, Daniel's recorded voice said. Maybe less. The doctors say her heart could give out any day now. Vanessa's voice, off-screen. And then? Then we wait a respectable period. 6 months, maybe a year. And then you and I take that $75 million and disappear. What about the old man? Daniel laughed on screen. What about him? He'll be too busy grieving to notice anything. And even if he did, what's he going to do? He's practically a corpse himself. The video continued. More damning conversations. Discussion of accidents and untraceable methods. References to a yacht trip that would end with only one passenger returning. Each clip more incriminating than the last. By the time Marcus stopped the playback, the courtroom was silent. Howard Price had gone pale. Daniel looked like he might vomit, but it was what happened next that truly changed everything. Your Honor, the prosecutor rose, a woman I hadn't seen enter, District Attorney Patricia Wells. Based on this evidence, the state of Georgia is opening a criminal investigation into Daniel Perry for conspiracy to commit murder. We request that Mr. Perry's passport be surrendered and that he be remanded into custody, pending formal charges. You can't do this, Daniel's voice cracked. He stood up so quickly his chair fell over. This is a setup. That video is fake. He manufactured it. The metadata is verified, Marcus said quietly. The footage is authentic, and it was recorded on Mr. Bishop's own property, making its collection entirely legal under Georgia law. Daniel spun toward me, his face contorted with rage. You senile old... You planned all of this, from the beginning. I met his gaze calmly. You're right, I did. I'll destroy you, Two bailiffs moved forward, taking Daniel by the arms. He struggled briefly, then went limp, the fight draining out of him like water from a broken vessel. As they led him away, Vanessa, who had been sitting in the gallery, subpoenaed as a witness, tried to slip toward the exit. She didn't make it far. Miss Crawford, the district attorney called out, we'd like a word with you as well, about your role in this arrangement. Vanessa's composure finally shattered. It was his idea. All of it. I just went along with what Daniel wanted. Daniel's head snapped around. You lying? You were going to kill her and take her money. You said it would be easy. Shut up. But Vanessa couldn't be stopped now. The words poured out of her. Confessions, accusations, details that painted an even darker picture than the videos had shown. A prosecutor's dream witness, turning on her co-conspirator in real time. I watched it all unfold with something approaching satisfaction. Two predators, destroying each other in their desperation to survive. That evening, Sophia and I sat on the porch of the mansion as the sun went down. She held a glass of wine. I held a new carving, a miniature yacht, just beginning to take shape. Dad, she said softly, it's really over, isn't it? I looked at the yacht in my hands, thought about the one Daniel had dreamed of buying with her money, the one he'd never sail. Not quite over, I said, but the hardest part is done. The trial began on a sweltering summer morning. The Chatham County Superior Court was packed. Reporters, curious locals, people who'd followed the Savannah resurrection story from the beginning. Daniel Perry sat at the defense table in an expensive suit. He looked composed, confident even, despite the charges against him. Conspiracy to commit murder. Under Georgia law, that carried a potential sentence of 10 to 25 years. Howard Price had done his best to prepare a defense. His strategy was simple. Deny everything, discredit the evidence, paint the bishops as manipulative liars who had entrapped his innocent client. It might have worked if we hadn't had the video. The prosecution called Clarence Webb first. My private investigator walked the jury through months of surveillance, photographs, phone records, documentation of Daniel's meetings with Vanessa. He presented it all with the methodical precision of a former police officer. Then came the video. District Attorney Patricia Wells played it on the courtroom's large screen. Daniel's face filled the display, crystal clear, unmistakable. Then we arrange a little accident, nothing traceable. These things happen. People slip. People fall. People just stop breathing. I watched the jurors, 8 women, 4 men. Their expressions shifted from attention to disbelief to horror. 75 million, baby. We've earned this. When the video ended, you could have heard a pin drop. Price objected, arguing the recording was obtained illegally. Judge Catherine Sullivan was unmoved. The recording was made on Mr. Harold Bishop's property. There is no expectation of privacy in someone else's garden. The evidence stands. Vanessa Crawford took the stand next. She'd accepted a plea deal, 3 years probation in exchange for full cooperation. She described everything, the planning, the discussions about making Sophia's death look accidental, the yacht they'd intended to buy. He said it would be easy, Vanessa testified. A heart condition, a tragic accident at sea. Simple. That's a lie, Daniel erupted. She's lying to save herself. The judge's gavel came down hard. Mr. Perry, control yourself, or you will be removed. The most powerful testimony came from Sophia. My daughter walked to the stand with quiet dignity. She looked at the jury, then at Daniel. I loved him, she said. For 6 years I believed he loved me too. I trusted him with my life, and he was planning to end it. She described the moment she'd learned the truth, the messages, the casual way he'd discussed her murder. At my funeral, I lay in that casket and listened to my husband whisper about yachts and mansions, about how he'd spend my inheritance while I rotted in the ground, and then I sat up and watched his face turn white. Several jurors were openly crying. Daniel took the stand in his own defense. He tried to be charming, painting himself as a devoted husband framed by a vengeful father-in-law. The district attorney's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Perry, in the video, you discussed arranging an accident for your wife. Can you explain that? Daniel's composure flickered. It was taken out of context. Hypothetically planning your wife's death? I didn't mean. And when you consulted with an attorney about spousal inheritance rights during your wife's illness, was that also hypothetical? Daniel's facade was crumbling. I want to change my answer. There is no changing answers, Mr. Perry. There's only the truth. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 22 minutes. Sophia held my hand like she had when she was a little girl, afraid of thunderstorms. When the jury filed back in, the foreman stood with a folded piece of paper. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. What say you? The foreman unfolded the paper. The entire courtroom held its breath. We, the jury, in the case of the state of Georgia versus Daniel Perry, find the defendant guilty of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. The word echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. I felt Sophia's grip tighten on my hand. Around us the gallery erupted. Gasps, whispered exclamations, the scratch of reporters' pens. Daniel's reaction was everything I'd imagined and more. His face went through a rapid series of transformations. Disbelief first, then denial, then a dawning horror as the reality set in. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. His hands, which had been folded calmly on the defense table, began to tremble. No, he whispered, then louder. No, this can't be. He turned toward the jury, his eyes wild, desperate. You don't understand. They tricked me. They set this whole thing up. 2 bailiffs moved toward him, but Daniel wasn't done. This isn't justice, he shouted, his voice cracking. This is a vendetta. That old man, he pointed at me, finger shaking. He orchestrated everything. I'm the victim here. Judge Sullivan's gavel cracked down. Mr. Perry, you will be silent. I won't be silent. I won't. The bailiffs took him by the arms. Daniel struggled briefly, then went limp, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured balloon. His expensive suit was rumpled now, his perfectly styled hair disheveled. He looked old suddenly, broken. As they led him past our row, he locked eyes with me. Gone was the arrogant predator who'd whispered about yachts and mansions at my daughter's funeral. In his place was something smaller, diminished. You, he hissed, you ruined my life. I met his gaze calmly. No, Daniel, you ruined your own life. I just made sure you couldn't ruin anyone else's. They took him away. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. 15 years in state prison, no possibility of parole. The judge also granted Sophia an immediate divorce and declared Daniel a slayer, under Georgia's inheritance laws, legally barred from receiving any portion of her estate. Vanessa Crawford received her promised plea deal: 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent stain on her record. She left the courthouse without looking back, disappeared from Savannah the same week. I heard she'd moved somewhere up north. I didn't care enough to find out where. The media circus eventually died down. The Savannah resurrection became a story people told at dinner parties, a curiosity, a piece of local legend. A few weeks after the verdict, life began returning to something like normal. On a warm evening in late summer, Sophia and I sat on the wraparound porch of the mansion. The magnolias were in full bloom, their scent drifting through the humid air. Fireflies danced across the lawn where Daniel had once paced, planning his crimes. I was working on my latest carving, the miniature yacht I'd started months ago, now nearly complete. Every detail was precise: the tiny sails, the delicate rigging, the polished wooden hull. On the stern, I'd carved 2 words in letters so small you had to squint to read them. "Never yours." Sophia watched me work, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. The haunted look she'd carried for so long had finally begun to fade. She was healing, slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. "Dad," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "At the funeral, when Daniel whispered to you about the money, how did you know he would say something like that?" I set down my carving knife and looked at her. My daughter, who had trusted too much and been betrayed too deeply, who had risen from a coffin to reclaim her life. "I didn't know," I admitted, "but I suspected. Greed is a disease, Sophia, and like any disease, it has symptoms. The way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching, the way his eyes would light up whenever money was mentioned, the way he'd calculate, always calculate." I picked up the tiny yacht, turning it over in my hands. In the operating room, I learned to read the smallest signs: a slight discoloration, an irregular rhythm, a tension that shouldn't be there. Daniel thought he was hiding his true nature. But to someone who'd spent decades reading what the body reveals, he was an open book. Sophia nodded slowly. "And the fake funeral? The whole plan?" "A risk, a calculated one. I knew Daniel would reveal himself eventually. I just gave him the perfect stage to do it." I smiled slightly. "Surgeons don't just cut, sweetheart. We create the conditions for healing. Sometimes that means removing the disease entirely." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The fireflies continued their dance. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. "What happens now?" Sophia asked. "Now?" I looked at my daughter, brave, resilient, finally free. "Now we live. You rebuild. Maybe travel, see the world. Find someone who actually deserves you. And you?" I held up the completed yacht, examined it in the fading light. Every plank, every rope, every detail exactly as I'd envisioned. "I'll keep carving my ships, keep tending the garden, keep being a father." Sophia reached over and took my hand. Her grip was warm, strong, alive. Daniel Perry had wanted my money. Instead, he got 15 years in prison to contemplate his mistakes. And me? I got my daughter back. That's worth more than $75 million. That's worth more than anything. If you like this story, subscribe to our new channel, Cold Revenge, as this one will soon cease to exist. You can find a link to the new channel in the collaboration section of this video, in the description, or in the comments. Subscribe so you don't lose us and can continue listening to interesting stories about revenge. Thank you for your